Hey, David.
Good afternoon. Well,
Thank you for
good afternoon
making
for
all
you.
those changes. That's great.
Yeah, and I figured there's still a lot to do in there.
Yeah,
I
well,
think, yeah,
I'm pretty confident we'll be able to do it. We just need to make sure we're tight on content and include, the sections
mhm.
that need to be included. Or you were
Yeah.
saying?
So I was as I was reading through the document and working on it, like generally when at least they may have changed since I used to do a lot of IETF work. Generally, the first kind of thing is kind of a requirements, here's who we are, here's what our problem is, here are the requirements we'd like to meet that are not currently being met.
Yeah,
That's kind of the way of first framing the
right.
conversation, which is why I thought going straight to the reference architecture before we had the initial conversation with them that said, you know, we did a gap analysis, these are the gaps we found, these are the requirements that we'd like
Correct.
fulfilled in
Yeah,
these gaps,
yeah,
seemed like a better approach than here's a full-blown reference architecture. um, so I figured that that would be the best way to approach it. And you have your use cases there. But if we look at the gap analysis for the Whimsy document, there's actually 5 points that were brought up of areas that confidential compute could help. But we only had 3 use cases in the document. So I don't know if we need to reconcile if really those 5 points are covered in those 3 use cases and figure out what the right way to drive that section forward is. Is it, do we drive it off the 5 points that were in the gap analysis, or do we drive
yeah.
it off the 3 use cases that were determined last meeting?
Well, I mean, the use cases are also a form of a gap analysis, if you think
Yeah.
about it. Like, if Whimsy
Hmm.
met those use cases, then we wouldn't be having the conversation,
Hmm.
right? So we may, in fact, I do not know, we may even like the motivation is as stated. I think the charter says it well, and then um, yeah, from there it's I'm actually less worried about that section as I'm worried
Hmm.
about sort of the meat, and this is what I want to spend most of the day on today
Hmm.
is basically figuring out what are we going to say about some very critical sections of that document. So, we, so okay. So let's see what are the main ones. So the first one is credential procurement and acquisition,
Hmm.
right? So, and that's, once we settle on the introduction, which we can actually do as a late edit, like it's good that
Hmm.
we brought in
Yeah.
some content from the charter, but I don't want, like, I want to now dive in with a month left on the specific sections that need elucidation.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
credential procurement and acquisition would be one. Let me start sharing my screen here, and I'm gonna put the chat and the meeting minutes in, and I'm gonna. So that's meeting minutes, and then let me start sharing. Thank you all for joining. I know it's early for some and probably late for others. Okay. Oh, and Zvonko, I wanted to mention to you specifically, I'm not going to be able to make the attestation SIG meeting today, just superseding conflict. But I do want to resume the conversation around testing AI/ML workloads, and if anything's discussed, I'll probably just watch the recording. Hank, you have your hand up.
Yes, sorry for being late, as always, running. I prepared a update to the ID, to the skeleton ID that we have. Would it be fine with some owner or main admin to make me able to branch in this repo? Is it fine?
Yes. Yogesh might be able to do it for you. If not, Rian will.
Rian will do that for you. I think I did send your email to your GitHub ID to him, but please send your.
Okay.
Otherwise, I can I view your GitHub ID? Hank, I remember.
My GitHub ID is my first name and my last name, all
Okay.
low caps, one word.
Okay, folks, take
Okay.
that to chat. So here we can
Yeah,
proceed
sorry.
with
sorry.
the main.
Yes.
Okay, so credential procurement and acquisition is one, province is another. Now I'm gonna throw a couple others that I simply am just gonna put under question marks because I don't know they're gonna make. So there is this concept of a whimsy context. And I think we need to do some investigation into how what we're proposing relates to that. Then there is the reverse proxy and how identities come across proxies. That might be something that we might want to have, either explicitly leave it out of scope, but I would like it mentioned, or maybe we can talk about it. What else am I missing here that is, specifically, needs to be mentioned in this informational draft?
Hmm.
So you did mention the remote attestation stuff in the gap analysis.
Well, so yeah, well, I mean, if it's not
Yeah, I
right,
think
so
remote attestation is there. So we will mention in the gap analysis the remote
yeah.
attestation
And by the way,
stuff.
we're
Yeah.
not going to do gap analysis versus spiffy, not in this document. Here's just specifically around whimsy. And Hank, you have your hand up
Yeah.
again.
Mumbling to mute. Yeah, sorry. I think a certain gap is this typical data flow thing. Ideally, a diagram, for example, would allow for multiple types of flows. Who's, for example, triggering something? For example, this is, I think, a valid example, but I'm not sure how this is how we roll. The workload might be responsible to contain a shim/bootloader thing that initiates the some CSR thing, for example, like issuing a request for a CSR, for example, and then things
Yeah.
trigger off, or the platform has some trigger and the workload has an interface and you take off. So these data flows are typically the thing people find themselves in, like, oh, this is basically like how I'm doing it. While if you do very specific items, it's like, yeah, I'm not kicking anything off of the platform, so this is not for me. So allowing for various data flows and therefore different interaction models is of kind, I think, important for an architecture like document, and this is what we do, I assume. So that's a kind
I
of
think that's
gap.
a safe assumption here. So see what I just put into notes. So so we talk in the reference architecture draft that we have out there about credential procurement phase versus the acquisition phase. And we may mention in the informational draft that workload can self-provision. So acquire its own credentials, right? Generate its own key, generate its own CSR, and basically go proactively about saying, okay, I'm up, I would like my credentials now. So that would be one mode. And the other mode might be the workload owner provisions, but the workload then acquires them. Right, and then the control panel here is not trusted. So you basically, we can make, for instance, here's a scenario that would describe an informational draft. Instead of a workload owner procuring clear text credentials and placing it on a volume where the hosting environment can see them, right? That's kind of a problematic situation. We could, the workload owner procures them, but they're encrypted using a key, and then the workload acquires that key to, for instance, either decrypt the credential or obtain the corresponding private key, but it gets the public key, right? So these are the kinds of things, and we can do those swim lanes, much like we can effectively copy them from the reference architecture and incorporate.
Sounds good to me.
But we can mention those two modes.
Yeah, and we start with true, and let's see how this flies. So whatever other cloud CSPs are doing it today might also be of interest. Standards bodies typically want to be better, but of course there's existing stuff.
Okay. By the way, anything that we put under topics, please feel free to claim ownership and then deliver those subsections, because this will, in 4 weeks remaining, this will have to be a distributed effort. Right. So if you feel that you can, so for instance, like credential procurement and acquisition, I can, I will own that. Gap analysis versus whimsy. I mean, I can, maybe Yogesh can.
Yeah.
There
I
is
mean, there is
context is the
some.
one that I still want to understand, and it's because I don't quite understand the whimsy context is why I'm hesitant to take it on.
Okay, I can take this gap
Yeah.
analysis.
Uh, I also, can we maybe just spend a few minutes and talk about provenance, because we've been kicking this can down the road, and I think I predict that provenance is going to be at the bone of contention, because it's sort of radically new, and it doesn't have an established zeitgeist, I guess, in the industry. So it's unclear, how to convince people that, that yes, we can make it operable. So let me start by saying that basically there's probably many ways to skin the cat, but in my experience, credentials should remain small. Like in Windows, for contrast, like the Kerberos ticket could get so large it would no longer fit inside the HTTP header, right? So, so we're not going to like sticking the entire library of Congress bills of materials into the credential ain't gonna fly. Now, I don't want to preclude it, but I don't want to go there first. So I would imagine that there is a provenance. So we'll need to define terms, right? So there is provenance ID, and that's short, like JTI or X 599 S with ID, or we can put it down, like whatever, like some short identifier that you can pull out of the credential. Then there has to be, and was it Manu? Was it you who said that there is this?
Yeah.
I have.
The
You defined the term, right?
Yeah, so there's parallels with the verifiable credentials world in the W3C that basically tried to come into the ATF and was pushed aside a little bit. The SPICE group is also dealing with digital credentials, or whatever the term they use. But essentially, the missing piece in all of those systems is what's called the verifiable data registry. It's a place when you can go and put all the pieces that you need to be able to do a verification of the credential.
Yeah. So cool. So verifiable data registry. And then what's very important here, and again, somebody needs to sit down and do the research on this. And now again, by default, it can be me, but I'm like wearing a lot of hats. So relationship to existing efforts that we need to sort of document. So there is Salsa, there is in toto, there is this verifiable credential that you just mentioned. What was the other thing I was going to mention? The thing that I wanted to say here on provenance. So you receive this JTI or you receive this SVID ID. How do you know? Like, should we communicate the address point of this? So where you go to get the information in the credential itself, or is this communicated out of band?
Both seems viable, unfortunately. At least in the wild. Not necessarily for us, but it's out there, both.
All right, so out of band is sort of easier where your relying party magically knows. So, right, so out of band effectively, relying party has its own mapping of credential issuer to provenance metadata endpoint, let's just call it that. We'll need to define this term.
There's something that I know I'm repeating myself, or I don't want to come across as undermining what we're trying to achieve here, but we should be careful when we put anything outside of the credential and outside of the workload that has been attested and verified. If you put it outside, you now have a man-in-the-middle problem, and you break the cryptographic, chaining of that information. So the verifiability of anything ends up being compromised. So just want to put it out there that the minute we take something out of the workload itself or the credential that is presented by the workload, we break the cryptographic chaining.
Let's work through this so we understand. Like, for instance, it may be something we can mention into security considerations, or maybe not. Let's play test this for a second. And let's do two cases. There is the X509 credential, so a certificate. Certificate has an issuer, some sort of a CA, right? Which means, and Matesh, I'm going to get to you in just a second. I see your hand. Which means that you ought to be able to contact that and still be sure that whoever issued the credential can also point you at the metadata. We can attempt to define some protocol. I'm very loath to define protocols. I would love to base it on something existing out there, that if anyone knows of any, we should do it. I guess before I continue, Matesh, what did you want to say?
I just wanted to clarify, Manu, when I spoke last week, I was under the assumption, and I still am, that we're not talking about decoupling the metadata entirely off of the credential. We are just decoupling the storage, meaning the hash of the provenance record has to be inside the credential. That was always my thinking. So if we are talking decoupling it entirely so that somebody can forge the credential and they have different life cycles, the metadata or the provenance record and the credential, then I'm with you. I would be opposing that idea. But if we're only saying, the credential is strictly bound to the provenance record, but it just so happens that the provenance record has to be pulled from like a data store, but still semantically is the same entity, then I think we just can work off of the storage mechanism. Like, for example, Salsa is doing, I think they're doing both the, say, passport model, meaning they bundle the binary and the provenance, and they also do this transparency log. And there are options like the verifier.
Let me ask you this question. So if my credential is a WIT, so workload identity token in Whimsy parlance, and it has a JTI identifier, right? So supposed to be unique for that credential issued, like so. So this is the identifier of that credential. But that identifier is not in itself like a hash of anything, but it's simply a number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, and somehow we guarantee the semantics of it, that it's unique, and next time a different credential is issued, it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. Is that sufficient in your mind, or is that not?
I would say no, because then still, even if you sign the whole thing at the verifier, it gives you, a possibility to forge the record after the fact, because somebody else controls the life cycle of that credential at that origin. And you could
it wouldn't be the verifier. I'm not challenging. I just want to understand. So in this case, it's really not the verifier. The verifier produces attestation result. The attestation results somehow make it to the credential issuer, which would be the CA in this case. Right, or I guess not a CA if it's a JTI, but you get my point. So there is a credential issuer. The credential issuer signs the credential. Okay, and perhaps also maintains a record of I issued credential 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 because, and here's a pointer to the fuller record. I don't really see where the security binding problem arises here. Who can forge what? You have to trust your credential issuer. They are in your TCB.
But you should be trusting them at the time when they issue the credential, not in the future, not in the past. So they can very well have a leak of their provenance signing key if that was just a signed record at the ID number 2. We do trust the credential for the lifetime of the credential, but I believe we also enable the credential provenance to be auditable even past the lifespan of the credential.
Let me give you a real world example so we can play sort of from there. So my passport has a number, like serial number. It says absolutely nothing to me. It's a 9-digit number. I am sure that if somebody were to inquire, why was my passport issued, based on what evidence, that number is what's going to be used, right? And so we trust the United States government, or whatever country you're in, to issue your passport and maintain a record of why each credential was issued, right? Each passport. So you trust that not at the moment the passport was issued, which mine was issued, 2017. You trust it for the duration of the lifetime of the credential.
But that's the thing. I think we can do better than that because we have the ability to bind it with an actual thing that the verifier verified. It doesn't even have to disclose that thing. It can be encrypted. But we can do better than the trust me, I'm a government kind of a scenario. We can say, at the time we've issued the credential, this is what we saw. And whoever is going to audit that even in years in the future, they would be able to walk that tree and see, yeah, this is exactly what they used at the credential issuance. This is the identity that was being viewed at the time. With your government example, technically a fraudulent government can, augment that record going forward. And yes, it's I guess, a valid security model, and heck, passports work this way. But I would say within technology confines we are at, we can do a bit better because we can actually snapshot the whole thing with a hash strength.
Okay, so I guess I don't want to design it in this meeting. I will tell you that I have a little bit of heartburn about this. Let me try and explain. So, say for one, my first piece of heartburn is that I want to cause as little disruption to existing mechanisms, protocols as possible. And my sense is existing JTIs and X509 identifiers are relatively short. They are not SHA-2 hashes. They are not, don't have sort of a sense of full metadata. They're not long blobs. And to change them from one to the other is sort of the blast radius has increased. So that's one, put it to the side. The other one is, suppose there is some sort of a, record of, credential issuance proofs, etc. In one situation, you say, I have record number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So go look that up, and there's a bunch of stuff there. And the other one is, here's a hash of what have been record 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if I can forge one, I can forge the other, ultimately. And it's, it feels like instead of, there is some sort of security consideration, but to me, the credential issuer is such a highly trusted thing. And if it does get compromised, well, you know what you do? You revoke its signing key, and you basically say, yeah, super duper sorry, we lost those records.
Just a very quick one. I see there is quite a bit of hands up. I would just say there is a difference in the credential space in the sense that as you issue the credential, it's gone. I mean, technically, your entity of the issuer might even cease to exist. Say that was a third party. The credential is now in the wind, which means you are not able to easily change the hash as the value, and then your attack of changing what was being verified now becomes an attack on the hash function, which is orders of magnitude more difficult, just forging a record which is at the URL somewhere. But I guess we can take this discussion somewhere in the chat or Slack or anywhere.
Okay. Hank, let's just do in order. Hank, you're next up. Are you muted, Hank?
I ran around. I muted myself on my headphones. Stupid Hank. So yeah, I think auditability after the fact, which is what I heard. Under which conditions is vital, critical actually to every supply chain thing. And this is kind of a we talk talking provenance, we talk identifiers. It's issued somewhere. That's a micro supply chain. So having that as an auditable piece is an add-on. And I think it is not overcomplicating things. It's an option that you can consider. And I think even the ID could go into the an application scenario of how such verified data registries would work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yogesh?
And that's exactly my point. I think let's not kind kind of hung up on a hash as the only solution. You can have multiple ways to address that problem which he mentioned about auditability, verifiability. You can have a verifiable data structure or an append-only transparency log where you can put the provenance metadata and the ID associated with that, which is open to auditing, inspection, and immutability characteristics with cryptographic verification. So what I'm trying to say is that yes, hashing is one way, but we should not kind of restrict that ID has to be hash. Then only it can achieve these properties or gain this auditability and verifiability in a transparent manner. Yeah, that's all I
Okay.
wanted to say.
So we're going to probably, if we have time, we can continue today, but this is a discussion for the mailing list. Let me try and start this way. Let's try and put what we consider uncontroversial into the draft right away, because again, you
Yeah.
can't edit a blank page. And then whatever we decide, is controversial, we can hash out. We still have a little bit of time. So, okay, so I think we agree that in a credential, there has to be some kind of a provenance ID, not a full provenance, but we're going to recommend that there's going to be a relatively short provenance ID, that there will probably be we can say there are two mechanisms for acting on this provenance ID. Either there is an item on the credential that yet to be defined, that is the URI of this endpoint, or the relying party needs to figure out what that endpoint is out of band, perhaps, based on its relationship with the credential issuer. Can we agree on those three?
Yeah.
Okay. And from there, the relying party or the auditor, having looked at the, and David, I'm going to get to in just a sec, having looked at the provenance ID, then we can illustrate some kind of a interaction diagram. Now, this is where things start getting fuzzy. I go to my CA and say, well, you issued this ID, why? Well, the CA may respond with some, saying, well, you have to look further because I got this information from verifier. So here is the, link to their stuff. And the verifier may say, well, I got my reference values from the CI/CD pipeline. So like this can get deep. And this is where I'm very loath to create a new protocol. If there is something that exists that lets you follow the breadcrumbs, we need to basically say, use that. David.
So I think this is all good information, and this would go into an internet draft, but I don't necessarily think all this information is what you want to put into the draft that's going next month. I think, as I was saying earlier, the point of the draft next month is to identify to the working group, here is our environment, here's what we see that is currently lacking from Whimsy, and here are requirements that we need to be met by Whimsy for it to be usable in our environment.
Okay.
And then they can decide whether or not this is work they want to take up, right? Because the working group has to take this work up to standardize it.
Yeah.
And if you throw a massive 50, 60, 70 page document with all sorts of implementation details, like Yogesh mentioned earlier, with what he was saying, that there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can do the cryptographic binding to the provenance ID, right?
Mm-hmm.
So none of that belongs in a requirements document. That's all like when you're actually getting down to the nitty gritty and you're saying, here is the standard document that will be the actual changes to Whimsy from the the tokens and the cryptographic agility and all these various things.
Yeah.
So if it'd be better to scope the work for the next month down to finding what are the problems that we have with Whimsy, which a lot of work has been done in this area already. What are the properties that are missing from it that we need, and what are the requirements that we have for that property? Because I heard earlier for your provenance ID is that one of the requirements should be there's a way from the provenance ID to determine who is the issuer of the credential. That's a requirement that's easy to grasp, but doesn't go into the details of, do we put the URI of the verifier? Do we put the URI of some out-of-band mechanism? Do we describe what the out-of-band mechanism are? That's all way too much detail for something that's kind of like the first, here I am to the working group, and here's what we need to work with you.
What I'm hearing you say is, and I want to hear what the rest of the group feels about that, is this informational draft is kind of an opening salvo, and we can, in fact, ruin it by digging into too many details, because we can basically offer to the Whimsy working group, work with us on satisfying and there may be a separate informational draft on like specifically focused on provenance in a token.
Yeah. So it usually when you write an internet draft, you want to scope it to the small portion of what you're working on.
Yeah.
So when I did my internet drafts for Label NFS, I showed up first with requirements. Then after I came back, they're like, well, we want to see an impact assessment against the current protocol of what you're proposing. So then I came back with an impact assessment. Then I came back with the actual draft, which had here's the actual modifications to the XDR definitions in NFS that are going to be needed to accomplish this functionality and the various other things. And then there was, for example, part of the label was a token identifying what the format of the label was. So I then went off and had to make an internet draft for what the registry for the descriptions of those labels looked like, right? So that one document that started as, it didn't even start as requirements initially. It started as a presentation at an IETF meeting in PowerPoint. No document associated with it whatsoever. Spidered into about 8 or 9 different documents for a relatively simple feature at the end of the day.
Okay,
So
fair enough. Okay, so I just want to make sure that we go down through. I hear you loud and clear. So Hank, you're muted again.
Jesus Christ, I'm so sorry. I'm tired. I'm just tired. So there's one little trick you can do if not to overlay and in the 00 ID, put some interesting topic into the appendices. Let the document end at the crisp core, and then facilitate appendices for some. Well, and then there could be provenance. Well, and then there could be auditability after the fact. Well, and and have these topics in the attack basically. So appendices are FYIs in a 00, to be honest.
Yeah.
Well, appendices are fine for, I guess, more detailed things. I still feel like provenance is such a core requirement that, we might be able to just mention it and then put details in the appendix.
Yeah.
Would that be okay?
Yeah. So exactly. Don't overload. So for the quick read, don't overload the main body, and then we can have details. And actually, again, not addressed items in the appendices. It's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Yogesh.
Yeah, so I kind of agree that we should keep a document concise, and what we should highlight is the core of the TWI, which the existing Whimsy protocols do not address. That should be the meat of our draft, and how we present it, that this is the thing which is required for trustworthy workload identity, which is not covered by Whimsy. Like provenance is one thing, remote attestation, binding of workload to the platform is essential for our requirement of trustworthy workload, and that is not covered in Whimsy. Those kind of highlighted stuff we should describe in a concise manner, and then leave the a lot of
And by
details
the
to somewhere
binding
else.
to the platform, by the way,
Yeah.
is this separate effort that we need to figure out, basically combining workload attestation with platform attestation. Now,
Yes.
do you feel that in the main text of this document, as opposed to what Hank just mentioned would be an appendix, we should have like core swim lane diagrams? Like, this is how you do your, CSR attestation, where you present verifiable attestation results to the CA. Would that be in the main text?
I think it can be in the main text, because remote attestation is quite fundamental for our requirement in trusted workload identity, right?
But also I hear that we don't necessarily need to do this for every type of credential, at least initially. Or do you want to do it for Windows Identity Tokens as well as X509 certificates?
So why don't you describe the requirements for your remote attestation there, and then leave the implementation to a separate internet draft specifically on remote attestation in Whimsy, and specifically provenance in Whimsy, because those could be large documents on their own, right?
Yes,
it's their own very specific security considerations, their very specific IANA considerations, all those various things.
Yeah, I hear that. I guess the reason I would advocate for having at least one swim lane diagram illustrating the role of attestation is it's easier to consume information that way than it is from a word
Yeah.
description.
100%. I think one swim lane diagram for provenance and one swim lane diagram for remote attestation doesn't hurt with a contextual text next to it to explain the
Mateusz.
concept.
First off, I do agree 100% that we should keep it more problem-centric than solution-centric at this time,
Mhm.
because we want them to brainstorm on the solutions with us, not to give them a prescription of here's how we do things,
Sure.
because that's gonna create yet another, kind of rift between the communities. But the other thing, kind of separate, I just wanted to draw your attention to is I did a PR just literally an hour ago,
Mhm.
adding the term distinguishing the provenance of workload from the provenance of the credential. It might be too controversial to just add to the draft, but I would say this is the level I personally would like to keep it at, meaning not go into how we package that into whichever format or even what's the actual discovery protocol. But whether there is one provenance or two, I think we better decide within ourselves. And if my proposal is too controversial, I'm happy to take it to the mail list. I just wanted to kind of draw attention to it. It's out there. I think it's too fresh to review at this meeting, but hopefully next week we could give it a spin.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. So great use of our time so far. We're just over halfway through the meeting. What are we not talking about that we should be?
Oh, just one clarifying question. Is a gap a problem?
Is what,
Sorry?
sorry?
Yeah, we're talking about, you were just highlighting that we should not focus on solution so hard, but explain the problem, right?
Yeah.
The thing to fix. So,
Right.
and now my question is, there's a list under gaps. Are gaps problems?
Yes.
Well, right. So, so the problem we're trying to solve is how can we place trust that the workload authenticating to a relying party is what it claims to be, and perhaps satisfies additional requirements. And this is where the whimsy has, without confidential computing, has key architectural shortcomings. And I think we mentioned that already, right? And we mentioned what those three things are. There is lack of isolation. As a result, there is a lack of binding, and then separately, there is a lack of provenance. So that is a simple statement to make. Now, how are you going to go about it? We can basically say, well, there's confidential computing. It gives you trust execution environments, and all the data inside trust execution environment is protected. So we can state that that's easy to consume. And then we say, well, but it also requires remote attestation, which now needs to be part of your credential issuance dance. Here is a sample interaction diagram that shows the role of verifier in this dance, and make it perhaps explicit that many ways to skin this cat. This is just for example, right? Separately say, provenance is, for all these reasons. We can even say the details need to, will be worked out later. Perhaps a small example in an appendix.
Yeah. Manu has his hands up.
Yeah, if we limit the document to the gaps or problems, we should probably mention composability also in there, so that at least we open the conversation and we just, because we've tabled that and we said we can address that later. But I think if it's just about the gaps and the challenges, we should have composability in there.
Composability as
of
in
what?
CPU plus GPU type stuff?
Yeah, and then other artifacts and other, if you have a workload that's a composite of multiple workloads, a composition of workloads, that we should bring that up too, because
Should we have perhaps, and this is again trying to keep this I imagine us having like 20 minutes in the ITF meeting to discuss it, and then just how many changes we can follow. Could we maybe have a section where we mention this, but perhaps as part of future work? Like, is that an accepted practice in our informational drafts? Saying, these are the main points. In the future, we would also need to address, go down the list.
But if you look
So-
at the bullets that we have here, we have isolation, we have binding, we have attestation, we have provenance, and composability. I think these are the pillars of what we're saying. That's what we worry about at the CCC. So
Okay.
I think it's 5 items that are
Mhm.
foundational to what we do, and we
Yeah.
have them captured there very nicely: binding, isolation, attestation, provenance, and composability.
Yeah.
And so I think that would be the message to Whimsy, saying this is what we worry about.
Okay. No, that's fair. I was trying to understand. Uh, is what is the right threshold for TMI? Too much information.
To be honest, I would take the 5 words that Manu just said and place them as section headers. And underneath
Yeah.
that, give yourself a brief problem description in each one and give the justification for it and then what your core requirements for this feature are.
Yeah.
If you put those 5 sections in just like that with that outline, I think that would be a perfectly acceptable document to bring to them and say, we don't have provenance right now. Why is provenance important? What problems is it trying to solve? And here are the exact requirements that we want to be met by a provenance functionality in Whimsy.
Right.
And if you did that as a provenance section, that would be absolutely perfect for a requirements internet draft to bring to them as here's the work we want to do with you guys. And we can talk about how we accomplish all these requirements later on.
Okay. All right. So, okay, big part of my job here is to sort of keep trains running on time. Is it possible for you folks on this call to look through this list that we just compiled so far and assign ownership to yourselves? Basically, what of this can we have done by this time next week? And then we can do commits and PRs, pull requests over email.
So I have added some text on remote attestation and provenance already. We just needs to cut it down with the details of metadata about provenance and just say ID, and it is to be decided what all things, but exemplary things and stuff like that. So I will fine tune that work.
Mm-hmm.
Apart
Just
from that,
put your names down into the document so we basically know who is doing what, and we can follow up next week. And again, like life happens, it's a long weekend in the US, and
I have a
I
holiday.
get that you might miss a deadline, but at least so we know who's responsible for what. And then if somebody cannot do what you're signed up for, holler on the mailing list. Maybe somebody can say, fine, I'll step in and do this. But I just want to make sure we have this ownership.
So
Otherwise, if it's nobody owns it, then it's not gonna get done.
So I'm happy with the provenance section.
Okay.
You can
There's
put my
also
name.
someone creating a PR for this, I think, highlighting. I can only remember young kid in arm photo on this call.
That's David.
Yeah, there was a PR incoming for that, huh?
Yeah,
So
so I put a new there's a list of 9 things that I included in it, but it doesn't really touch these 5 items and create sections from and things like that. It did the introduction, redid the abstract, some things like that. Brought in a lot of the content that we already written from other documents and stuff.
So should we, Mark, I have a question on that actually, what he has done. Yeah. Should we put all the gap analysis stuff with details that much into this draft? I think that will be too much information. What, David, you have done?
I didn't really put the whole thing in there. I just put the text from the remaining gap section of the gap analysis.
I wonder if we should go for gap analysis as a separate section, because I think it's implied.
Yeah.
We're coming to the ITF because we have a set of requirements. Current Whimsy architecture does not meet them, right? So, Whimsy architecture doesn't talk about composability. It doesn't talk about, it actually does talk about binding, because workload identity tokens is strongly bound. But what it's lacking is isolation. So it's lacking remote attestation. So, if we can simply say that, then we can skip the gap analysis.
Yeah, that's fine. It doesn't need an explicit gap analysis section.
We needed gap analysis for our purposes, so we can basically look and say, what's out there and like how far are we? But we don't need to tell them that.
Yeah. Well, you could just say, so we don't need it as an explicit gap analysis section, but somewhere in the introduction or in the abstract or something like that, we need to mention the fact that we did our due diligence. We looked at the Whimsy architecture, we looked at our requirements, and we identified gaps. Now, these 5 things are the gaps that we identified. Here's,
Right.
the problem, the justification, the requirements for these 5 things.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe an explicit gap section is not necessary. I'm definitely happy to concede not having an explicit gap analysis section.
Yeah. Well, again, short
yeah.
meeting, succinct
Yeah.
content, very targeted, making covering all the high order bits.
Because you also have to look and see exactly how many items are on the docket for the meeting too. Because if you're one of 15 items for this meeting, you might not even get 10 minutes.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, I
but
think
it's a conversation starter, and then like I'll be there in person this time, and it's also something that we can talk to people over dinner or in the hallway or whatever.
Yeah, the hallway track is incredibly important at IETF.
Yeah.
Like at least half of going to an IETF meeting is building the relationships with the various people that you're going to work with in the chairs and everything like that.
yes,
So that you don't
and
get ignored.
we have 5 topics and we have 15-minute presentation. We can give justice by giving 3 minutes to each topic and the next highlight the kind of thing which we need, and then say go read the draft when we present this. So we need 15 minutes of at least time for presentation. Mark.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. All right. If I may, I'd like to switch tracks here for just a second because there is something that's been bugging me. So we did these swim lane diagrams in the reference architecture around getting attestation results and putting them inside of like CSR or whatnot. What's missing from those diagrams is freshness. And especially in case where you like, so when you get a CSR, right? So you talk to a CA and you say, I'd like to give you a CSR. You don't provide freshness. You don't request freshness. That leg of the protocol is missing. It's been a mystery to me personally why remote attestation requires freshness. But that's for that station's sake. But if a nonce is required, then we need to somehow figure out how to introduce it into those flows, right? And in both, in both models.
You don't necessarily need a nonce, right? It can be time-based if you trust clocks enough.
Except, do you?
So there could be a trusted time server which is trusted by all parties, and then that can give you the time.
Well,
and
it
that
can
be used.
It can, except
yeah, especially
that
at CSPs, that's high scale. Like with remote DMA, you are like printing valid high precision timestamps into memory for workloads or platforms to use.
I just wish somebody from Microsoft or Google right now could speak up and say how they handle that, because ultimately I want to make sure that whatever is designed in this forum works for them.
Shall I bring a Microsoft workload identify expert and incubator here?
Yes, please.
Okay, I can ask.
Okay.
Austin time zone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, but again, these are the kinds of things that if you consider them late, they might derail everything. So I'd rather.
Yeah, I'm not sure we are happy with the input because it might be a little bit more, I want to say, sophisticated.
Yeah. To best of my knowledge, you may know different, and perhaps tell me if that's the case. To the best of my knowledge, there is no way for a trust execution environment to know exactly what time it is. Like, in part because the hosting environment can start and stop it at any time.
That's why you would use a timestamp token from a TSA acquired by an I don't know, API somewhere.
So
if
see, the attack might be the workload asks for the current time, and then it's given the current time, but then it's paused for the next, I don't know, 3 days, and then when it wakes up, it you give it the time and says, well, it must be Monday when it's Tuesday.
Absolutely understood, and every verifiable laugh at every evidence like that. No.
Right. Okay. But I guess, again, if the nonce is part of the attestation workflow and then you somehow neglected to request it, then, well, verifier will laugh again. So I'd like to.
So, yeah, sorry.
It needs to work. It needs to work with verifiers out there.
Again, that's an interesting point. Verifier is a hardly overloaded term. I was putting a disambiguation of terms somewhere. And so a REDS verifier does care about freshness. A three-party model verifier might just care about expiration periods. Done. So very different uses of time or freshness period, whatever, validity period. So it really depends on which role you are referring to. Same to the relying party, because they come with different requirements. And I think that disambiguation is important as soon as you collide remote attestation with a three-party model that is issuer, holder, and I guess verifier at the end. I don't even remember, right?
Okay. All right. So unless you have other topics, I just want to wrap up, making sure we reviewed what the deliverables are for next week, that they have owners, and then if there's anything else, please bring it up. Otherwise, let's get cracking on the content, and we'll review the progress this time next Tuesday.
Yeah, I'm away
Just
next
one
week,
quick,
but I will make sure that I put some more tidy up on the provenance section and try to cover up other sections. So that's an update from my side. Yeah, sorry,
Okay.
go ahead. Yeah.
Question to Manu. Did you bring up the causability, and would you be willing and able to add a paragraph to the text, or is this not your lane?
Sorry, guys, I was multitasking.
No problem. Composability of workloads was important to you, I think.
Well, I mentioned it, but my bandwidth is close to zero for the next 3 weeks. So, but I will look at the document. I'll see if I can write something, but I'm a very useless person as far as actually writing stuff and getting it done. As you remember, I'm trying to start a company, so I have to focus on customers and
Yes.
investors. So.
Is there any way that you could just jot down a couple bullet points and I can turn it into prose for you?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, that would work. And Mark and Yogesh, one thing that was mentioned earlier was getting push access to the repository. The only thing is, if you start handing that out to a lot of people, you got to make sure that that main branch is branch protected, so that people don't accidentally push into main instead of an actual remote branch.
Yeah, that's good. This is for Yogesh and Rian. I think they're handling the
Yeah, the
rights
problem
for you.
is I don't have a direct access to controlling the repo parameters, and I need to everything. I need to go through Rian. He should branch lock the main so that only approved pull requests get merged into main. I will make sure that I drop an email about that.
Or
So
I didn't
Yogesh,
have access to this morning, so I just forked it and created a PR against the fork. That's probably the safer of the routes, because then people don't need access to commit to the main repository at all. But then if you and Mark are out of town, no one can merge anything, right? So that
also sometimes if you forget to make your fork editable, you're like eager to do a suggestion and you can't. And so so branching to core contributors is, to my, like, a super relief. Like it's way more easier. That's why I was asking initially.
Okay.
Offline, David, you send me your, if you're not added as part of the organization, please send me your GitHub ID, or I think I can take it from there, and I will request Rian for yours and Hank's addition to that. I think Matez, you are already there, right, on the group, if I understand correctly.
That's correct.
I will commit to 24-hour reviews on all pull requests.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, folks, I need to drop because somebody at work is really pulling on me right now. So I'll see you all next week.
Yeah.
But I'm not. I'm just leaving. I'm not ending the meeting. So.
Okay. Thank you for leaving it open. Yogesh, when you reach out, can you just add my GitHub username to whatever you were asking to responsible party name here?
Yeah.
Would that be fine? I'm part of the org. I'm just not part of the repo permission team. I guess there's a
Okay.
team or something like that may then mess with
Yeah.
repos. I don't know.
Yeah, it was Rian. So I need to drop an email to Rian asking
Okay.
you and David to be added as
David,
part of
yeah.
the group. Yeah.
Okay.
DPQ. Okay. Okay, great. Anything else anybody wants to discuss more? Or we have 5 minutes, I think. That's all we have for today. So otherwise, if we can close the call, if and we I will let Mark drive the meeting next week as well because I'm not here next week. I'm off, but I will work on the PR while before going on holiday. So yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. Talk to you next week. Next to next week for me, but you please continue with the meeting next week. Yeah. Thank you. Bye.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Okay, bye, guys.